Hello and welcome to The Connection Compass. I'm your host, Andrea Louise Evans. To find out more about my work, please visit andrealevans.com. This week, I meet with Charlotte Stevenson, author of The Serial Killer's Son and The Guest. Charlotte and I have worked together in public health, and up until recently, she was my boss. We come together today, though, to step away from our usual conversations and discuss Charlotte's writing experiences, publishing her novels, and her new book that's out in January, The Neighbours Next Door. So sit comfortably and listen along. Welcome, Charlotte, to the Connection Compass podcast. It's so lovely for you to be here. Obviously, I know you because we've worked together in public health over the years, but you have wrote two amazing novels with a third one on the way. Can you share with me a little bit about your journey into writing?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Andrea. It's lovely to be here. So, my first novel, The Serial Killer's Son, was published in November 2023. My publisher is Bloodhound Books. They're a fantastic publisher. I write twisty, dark, psychological thrillers. And yeah, The Serial Killer's Son was my first novel. It took me about 2 or 3 years to write it, and then a little bit longer to sort of get up the courage to submit it and see if anybody would like to represent it. And I was delighted to have offers from a couple of different publishers. So yeah, so that was the first one. My second novel, called The Guests, again, a sort of darker thriller, a little bit of a spookier one the second time around. That was published in August 2023. And as you say, I've got another one coming out in January. I balance working 3 days a week, as you say, in public health, and we used to be colleagues. We miss you very much. And 2 days a week I now dedicate to my writing. So that's a really lovely balance for me, and I'm really enjoying it.
Sounds amazing. And The Serial Killer's Son, I have read, and it is actually spine chilling. We'll talk a little bit about the twist. And I'm partway through The Guest, which is another page turn as well. Now that you're dedicating 2 days a week to your writing, do you have a particular routine? Do you write in the mornings or in the afternoon? What kind of works for you?
Okay. So I had to sort of try and develop that over time. When I was writing The Serial Killer's Son, and I was brand new to writing, I just sort of started writing at chapter 1 and just tried to get it all down on paper. But now I've sort of worked out what works best for me. So what I do is, first of all, I pull together, it's usually 2,000 to 3,000 words of an outline of what I'm planning on writing. Now, I say planning on writing because what I end up writing isn't often exactly what's there, but it gives me a skeleton to work from so that I have an idea of a beginning, a middle, and an end, what kind of twists I'm going to throw in and where, so that I have that basic idea of when I should hit which point in my word count. Then what I do is I spend a bit of time really fleshing out my characters. All of that information might not go into the novel, but I need to know who they are, how they feel, how they think, the things that they like, how they like to dress. And I flesh them all out so that they feel like real people to me. Even if I never even, give the reader the color of their hair, I know it, so they feel like real people to me. And I know how they might act or behave in any given situation and the way they might speak. So once I've completed those two things, then I do write start to finish as fast as I can, get the story out, just to have it all down on paper. And then I tend to go through 2 or 3 redraft processes before I then submit it. So I'm not a professional editor, but I edit it as well as I can as the writer before I submit it. But that first draft is really just getting it all out on paper as quickly as I can so that the story becomes a whole, a thing, in its entirety. So that's kind of the process I take.
The characters are amazing. And like you say, you do get a feel for the depth and complexity of them. So it's really interesting that you've given that description of your characters. Where do you get the ideas from the characters from?
All kinds of places, really. When I've gone back and read, I realise there's elements of myself in some people, of people I've known, of funny anecdotes I've heard or seen elsewhere, of situations where I actually thought something could have been different or somebody could have behaved differently, and I'll perhaps bring that element into it. None of my characters are based on any one person. None of the stories are based on anything that ever happened, but there's just elements of things I've picked up in my professional and personal life. And, when you're out and about in the world, often you'll just squirrel away something that you see or you're here. So, for instance, in the guests, Dr. McCabe, the psychiatrist, who's a sort of softly spoken Scottish gentleman, he has a thing for wearing colourful socks, which was just something I saw one day, and I thought, well, that'd be a cool character thing. And just little things that I see in people, that grab my attention. Just the small things bring people to life, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was, have you always been this storyteller? Is it something that you recognize in yourself from when you were very young? Or do you feel it's something that you've disconnected from, and then you've come back to it later in life?
Well, you know yourself, when you're following a clinical sort of career, you have to do certain subjects and study certain things. So when I decided I was going to go and try and apply for medicine and become a doctor, you have to leave some of the more creative subjects at school,
Yeah.
that sort of GCSE level, and focus on things like science and maths. Now, I love those things. I'm very happy to pursue them. I do absolutely love those things, but it meant that any of the more creative things kind of fell by the wayside, and did for many years. As you know, you have to do lots of exams and things to make your way up through the years as a doctor. So I've always been a voracious reader and tend towards reading thrillers, crime, horror, mysteries, things like that. And I've always read multiple books a week. And I think over the years, sometimes you read something and think, oh, wouldn't it be better if the ending was this? Or, oh, I wish they'd gone a bit deeper into that. Or, just it sparked off ideas. And I never put pen to paper, but I think I've always, sort of loved the idea of writing my own story. And I'm not sure if I ever would have. I would have loved to, but there's a time element, isn't it? I've got a big family and a job. But a few years ago, I had a bit of an accident, and I slipped on some ice on the decking in our back garden, and I broke my spine in a couple of places, which left me kind of having to lie down, then sit down, and I was off work for 6 weeks. And the majority of the first draft of The Serial Killer's Son was written during that time.
Wow.
Because it was a tricky time, because I couldn't move, but children are out at school, husband's out at work. So I thought I'll try and achieve something that doesn't require any movement. And so I decided to write that book. And once I'd written the first draft, I just kept tinkering with it in any spare time that I did have. So although breaking my back was awful, it definitely was the push I needed to write that first draft of a novel. And now I've just made space for it in my life.
So it come out of an unfortunate accident, but it's something that was meant to be, I think. And
Yeah, I
something
kind of
for
look at
you,
it that way. I've healed completely from that
Mm.
accident, but now I can, at that point I had written a book, even if it wasn't published yet, and now it is. And because of that and because of how much I loved writing it, now writing is just a huge part of my life. And I think I'll always continue to do it no matter what.
That's an incredible story. What is particularly important to the work of the Connection Compares is about the ideas that we have and how we expand them. So at the point that you finished the serial killer's son, and then you decided to submit it for publication, what was kind of going through your mind? What were your thoughts and feelings around that time of submitting, about actually kind of pressing that send button?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a really vulnerable feeling because I hadn't told anybody that I'd written this work and I was submitting it. I hadn't even told my husband or my best friend or anything like that. I didn't tell them until I had a contract landing in my inbox, because it was I would have thought most people thought it was quite an unusual thing for me to do, considering what I do for a living. And everybody knows I love to read, but I'd never told anybody that I was thinking about writing. So it was a really vulnerable thing to do. And I was scared. I thought, what if I get really terrible comments back? What if I wasn't sure how I would feel about that. Would I be better off just thinking, oh, you've written this, it's an achievement, keep it to yourself? So I was really worried about what might come back, because I thought it was good. But what might other people say, and would that ruin this love for writing that I found? If somebody came back to me and told me it wasn't any good, would I still want to do it just for myself? But luckily, the response was really positive, and within a couple of months of submitting, I had a contract signed and a release date for later that year. So I just couldn't quite believe it. And it was very validating and very encouraging. And I'll always be grateful for that.
It was really exciting when you announced it at work. It was just
Yeah.
amazing.
I hadn't told anybody at work either, really.
Yeah, it was amazing, amazing achievement. But yeah, absolutely right. It is a very vulnerable time, isn't it? Because you're sharing a part of yourself that isn't seen, that isn't it's sharing that internal world, isn't it? That isn't obvious to everybody. They don't know that part of you. So
That's true. And also the type of books I write. So, in a caring profession, writing books about serial killers, I was thinking, oh, how is this going to land amongst colleagues? Because I'm really passionate about people writing characters and people writing stories, and that being absolutely no reflection on them as a person. So I'm an avid horror reader, and I know lots of people who write very dark horror novels. They are the kindest, nicest, most giving people you could ever imagine, who write things that would, you can't turn your lights off at night. It's very much an art and an expression. It's characters that, the words are what the characters think. You build those. They're absolutely not a reflection on the author themselves at all. It's just a different type of,
So
story.
it's art, isn't it? That's it.
Yeah,
It's a
it is.
creative artist process, isn't it? That's
Absolutely.
incredible. What do you think is the most challenging thing about writing that you come across?
Well, I've learnt sometimes you get days where it just doesn't flow, and it can be those days where, where it's one of my non-working days, all the children are at school, and I've got this clear time to write, and my brain isn't on it. And I've learned just to try and write through those. I'll put a little note in the manuscript as I'm typing it, saying, I'm struggling to a little note to myself that when I come back and do a rewrite, I'm really struggling with this bit, come back to it. And I'll go on to another bit where I feel like I can write that a bit more clearly and come back. because I've already outlined what I'm going to write, I tend not to get that sort of blockage on what comes next. But it's that writing on the days where the writing doesn't come as easily, where for whatever reason your flow of ideas is blocked, your sort of ability just to get the words down on the page, it just feels for some reason a bit hampered. And I've learned just to try and write through those, and then eventually it starts to pick up. I do find sometimes when you get into the middle part of the story, you can end up getting a little bit bogged down. Some of the detail starts to come out, but that can all be fixed. If you just put words down, you can come out and chop out entire paragraphs later on if you feel like it's not right. I think it's important just to keep getting the words down.
So when you're in the flow of writing, Charlotte, can you explain to me what that feels like?
Oh, it feels great. So yeah, it's when you can see. I'm a very visual person. I don't tend to think in words. I tend to think in pictures and images. And so it's when you can really play out, for me, it's when I can really play out in my head what's happening now, what's going to happen next, how everybody's acting. And it just seems to just come so easily. And to be honest, sometimes those are the bits when I go back and they need more heavy editing on the spelling and the grammar and that sort of thing. And that's fine, because in your first draft, what you're really trying to do is get that story down. So it's when you just feel like it flows and you can hear the characters saying that dialogue in your head and it feels right, and you're not looking for a specific word. The word just comes, and it's wonderful. And hours can pass when I'm in that kind of place. But like I said, I can usually tell when I go back through a manuscript which bits where I've written with real flow and ease, because they're perhaps less correct in terms of that sort of proofreading that's required and everything afterwards. And when things look a bit more stilted and they need that sort of atmosphere and extra bits added to it because I wasn't quite feeling it that day. But after redrafting several times, you can get it all to feel the same way. So yeah.
I recognize what you're saying. Actually, that's something I recognize in my writing, is that I can tell how I've been feeling in different parts of my writing. So I can always tell when I'm in a space where everything just flows with ease, from a piece of writing where I've perhaps had to put a bit more effort into it, and they have very, very different feels to them as well.
Definitely.
So your books, both The Guess and The Serial Killer's Son, are known for remarkable twists at the end.
Yeah.
Do you have to think long and hard about these twists, or do they just come naturally to you, Charlotte?
I usually, I sort of did a couple of online courses and things as I was building up my writing, because, I was coming at it from a complete beginner. And there's lots of stuff available, isn't there, for free, where you can, listen to people's experiences, learn how to do things. And one of the things I saw was to try and put your book into a kind of, like the blurb that's on the back. What's the crux of it? What's its sort of unique point? And so it's that, really. It's the kind of, at the start, you have your premise. Who's your main character? What's the whole premise of the story going to be? And then I sort of work out what that surprise ending, or, surprise things that might happen throughout, might be. And like I say, I do add bits as we go in. Sometimes I get halfway through and I think, oh, I could throw in another sort of little twist here just to mix it up a little bit. But I love a book that has a jaw-dropping ending and something that knocks you sideways. I love guessing them if I can. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And for me, that's something that's really satisfying in an ending, is where you didn't see it coming, or, it just totally surprised you. So I try and build that into that very first pitch or that sort of very first paragraph that sums the whole thing up. So yeah, I've always got the beginning and the end in mind before I start. And you have to add believability to that as you go through. Drop little hints, but not too strong are the hints. But if the person goes back and reads the book again, even though there's a twist at the end, it all still has to read believably all the way through. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it.
And they're both page turners. They're both amazing books.
Thank you so much.
You have a new book coming out, don't you, on the 15th of January?
Yes.
The Family Next Door. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. Now, I don't know if you've heard of an author called Belinda Bauer. She writes crime. She's an amazing author. I really admire her. And one of my favorite books, the main character is somebody over the age of 70. And I've always wanted to write a story with a main character, a fierce, strong, main character who's older. And so that was my first thing I thought I wanted to do. And the other thing I always quite wanted to do is I like a book with a creepy child, a disturbed child. So I decided to throw those two things into the mix and try and come up with a story. So I built those two characters first, a sort of precocious 8-year-old girl called Mirabelle and a retiree, Viola, who happened to end up living next door to each other. And it's a story of what happens when Viola realizes that the family next door, there might be something just not quite right with them. And she's retired now, but she had a background in children's social care, and she can't quite leave that professional curiosity behind. And it's how their story unfolds and the relationship between them. So I'm really excited to get this one out there. Plus, the guests and the serial killer's son were written as a first person narrative from multiple points of view. This is written in the third person. So sort of more from the outside describing the events. So I'm excited to see how that lands as well. So still very twisty and a bit dark. So
yeah, the hairs are already standing up on the back of my neck.
Yeah. My books are all very psychological, which I know some people do find more disturbing and more tricky, but there's lots of relationships in my stories and a gentler tone to a lot of it as well. So, things like there'll never be any animals harmed in any of my stories, that sort of thing. There's just there's certain things I don't like to read, so I don't like to write them, that sort of thing. So yeah, all very psychological and all about the relationships and the inner workings of the minds of the main characters, really.
Yeah, they're fascinating, and it wouldn't normally be my genre, but I've really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the serial killer's son and page turning with the guests as well. So they're really well written, and the twists, the testament to you as a writer, they're just fantastic. And I suppose my final question is, what kind of tips, advice have you got for anyone wanting to connect to the storyteller within?
Yeah, so there's that old saying, isn't there, that everybody's got a book in them, and I do absolutely think that's true. Now, I think if you feel like you want to write, then I would say write. It doesn't, most people aren't writing for fame or fortune. It's not. It has to come from wanting to tell that story. And I would say just start there. There's a huge community of book loving people out there. Before I even put pen to paper, I was a member of lots of online book groups where people share recommendations, readers connect, authors connect with readers. So find your people, find your community and connect with them. Read lots. find out what's out there in the genre that you like, what's successful, what's hot at the moment. We all know those books that blew up and then became movies. What is it that people want to read? But ultimately, write what you know, write what you love, and write something you would like to read. And kind of that's where I started.
Thank you, Charlotte. That is amazing. And I really enjoyed our chat today. It's nice to talk creativity, which is a little bit unusual from what our chats have been in the past. But
Absolutely.
thank you. And thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Andrea. It was lovely to chat with you. And thanks for having me.
What another beautiful conversation to have on the podcast. Charlotte's experience makes me wonder about all the people in established careers and have these other amazing talents that we don't always see because we're not looking for them. We just take what we see as fact without taking the time to learn more about the person than we see. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of The Connection Compass. If you would like to find out more about my work and Charlotte's work, please visit the show notes. If you have any questions about the podcast, please visit Andrea L. Evans' Facebook page. If you think this episode will help someone, please leave a review at podchaser.com. The next episode is a little earlier than usual and will be out on Monday the 23rd of December as I do a recap of all the episodes of the first series of The Connection Compass. And finally, remember, keep talking, keep connecting for a more interconnected world.